Alrighty, it's 6:33, so I'm going to get started. Great to have you all with us on this warm June evening. I'm Nate Erskine. I'm the programming chair for the Durham Orange Medical Society, and really happy to be hosting our first ever webinar on non-clinical careers. Just first of all, just start with a pitch. I think there's some people joining this call who may not be members of our medical society, and if you live in Durham and Orange counties or practice there, highly encourage you to join. I think we're a really great and supportive community. Um, just another programming note too is that next month we're going to be hosting a community service event at the Carolina Community Garden, which is a garden that provides produce for UNC staff, particularly those who may be lower income. The event will be Saturday, July 12th from 9 to 10:30. And we have an option to do breakfast at 8 a.m. at Brandwine's Bagels, which is a great place you haven't been, and then frozen yogurt afterwards. So I believe the announcement's already been sent out by that, but if you'd like to join, please feel free to message me directly. Um, for this evening's panel, as I was putting together the program for the year, I thought it'd be really interesting to spend some time chatting with people who had pursued non-clinical options. I think that there are a lot of us where, whether it's through the stress of trading or practice, sometimes wonder, is the grass greener on the other side? Moreover, too, I think we know in medicine that we are a profession where a lot of our professional work is dependent on people outside the clinic, whether it's in tech or regulators or pharmaceuticals. And I think having those collaborations with clinicians and business and industry and nonprofits is incredibly important. And then I think the other thing too is just that as people may struggle with burnout or age as well, or have life changes as well, it may be that their current clinical practice just isn't the most satisfying or sustainable option for them. And so I think that for people who have considered the change, one of the things that can be very hard is just trying to connect with people and understand what are the options there? How do I make the pivot? Is this right for me? And so I thought it'd be great to bring in some people with a variety of different stages, variety of different industries. So tonight, I'm pleased to welcome Felix Chinea from DOCMS, Drew Cutshaw from Pappas Capital, Elizabeth Holt from LifeScan, and Michael Utek from Carolina Complete Health. And so just for the agenda for this evening, I'm going to have each of our panelists will take a few minutes just to talk about their current work in their industry. And then we'll turn it over for a discussion section. I think the best thing would be for you to just direct message me questions in the chat, and we'll take it from there. So I am going to first turn it over to Felix, and a big welcome to the Durham Orange County Med Society.
Thanks, Nate. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. So my name is Felix. My pronouns are he, him. I live in South Durham in the Hope Valley area with my wife and our 45-pound Aussie Doodle who's turning 5 years old this year. We love being in Durham and purposely moved back here from Miami. I think it'd be helpful for me to give a bit of a sense of kind of what like trajectory or like what journey I've had into my non-clinical career, the current like role that I have right now. I graduated from med school a little ways down the road in Duke back in 2014. Decided to take a little bit of time and do some more research before going into or trying to go into residency. And so I did a postdoc in radiation oncology, specifically looking at prostate cancer disparities at Sylvester Cancer Center with the chair of radiation oncology over there, Dr. Alan Pollock, specifically looking at the Latino community and separating out disparities based on ethnic heterogeneity. So, like looking at folks from who were Puerto Rican or Mexican American and Dominican and separating out the data to show that there was differing levels of disparities there. And so my mind was very focused on becoming that academic clinician researcher that a lot of us are kind of exposed to as like the pathway in medicine of making a larger impact within medicine. And so that was very much where my mindset was at. And then at some point in that journey, I kind of looked at my PI's career and saw that he had spent decades on the same clinical research niche and still fighting for grants and still pushing forward like that sort of evidence. And I just wanted a different path. I wanted something that was a bit more faster paced, but still data driven. And I felt like tech was the route for me to go. So I ended up making my way into Doximity, specifically working with content strategy. So I first got my foot in the door within tech by using my research background and using that towards a content strategy, developing strategies for healthcare professionals, basically taking a lot of that clinical research that's being developed day in and day out. We all know that there's so much amount and volume of clinical research that's coming out every single day, and developing a strategy that makes that a bit more digestible for healthcare professionals and making it a bit more useful to their clinical practice day by day. Spent some time in Doximity for about a year and ended up making some good trouble in 2020 and pushing for more diversity, equity, and inclusion work within our company with a couple of other employees. And that ended up snowballing into becoming the role that I have today. So not only is my role both a traditional diversity, equity, and inclusion role as it pertains to our employees, but it is also a health equity role as it pertains to our business. So we're a tech company, we develop digital products. So a great question is how are we developing those digital products to become more equitable for the people that use it and for the patients that they serve as well? So I work with our product teams to think about that, to think about how we can more equitably design our products and use that to better ourselves as a business and develop an actual health equity strategy for us as a business and as it aligns to our mission. So I've been doing that over the last 5 years now and creating that foundation and developing that role. So it's been really exciting over the last 6 years to be in tech and shaping a role that doesn't exist at every tech company.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Felix. Next, I'll turn it over to Drew.
Course. Thank you, Nate, and thank you all for having me this evening. It's wonderful to get the chance to speak. My name is Drew Cutshaw. I currently serve as principal and medical officer for a group called Pappas Capital. We're based here in the Research Triangle Park. Our offices are right by South Point over in Meridian. And our firm has been in the business for about 31 years. We are a traditional life science venture capital firm. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time and I'm sure many of you are familiar with what venture capitalists do. But there is often some confusion as to what exactly we do. So venture capital is a subset of private equity in that we take equity positions in private companies, but I think that's about where the similarities stop between traditional venture capital and private equity specifically. Our role is to, specifically with my fund focus, is to invest in newly formed companies that have taken new drugs, new therapeutics. We're primarily a therapeutics focused shop. And then finance their phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, sometimes their phase 3 clinical trials. We also take an active operating role in all of these companies. We step on the boards of these companies, help design their clinical trials, help interpret the clinical data, help interpret the preclinical data, moderate the regulatory interactions with the FDA. It's a really, I think, rewarding ability to have an impact and help decide which investments either coming out of academia or that are in early stage research at large pharmaceutical companies will make it to that next level in funding. Some of you also might be aware just the funding life cycle of the way that new drugs get developed. In general, I think there's the correct assumption that the majority of early stage research is historically, and I have to say historically now, funded by the federal government through NIH grants, SBIR grants, and NCI grants, which really can stand up a lot of the early stage development for some of these clinical products. Then after there has been some investigative work where an investigator or some in a research and development organization might think that they have a viable product. Then it generally turns over to private industry. So private venture capitalists will then help incorporate the company and again run those trials, and sometimes earlier than just trials, run some of the clinic enabling work as well. On average, it takes about $10 million to get a drug into the clinic. It takes about 15 to 20 million to run a phase 1 trial. It takes about 50 to 75 million to run a phase 2 trial. And it takes about 150 million to run a phase 3 trial. And what's important to note about drug development activities is that, as many of you know, there is no reimbursement until the drug is approved by the FDA. So all that is at risk to us and at risk to the pharmaceutical industry that's putting it forward. So I thought I'd provide a little bit more detail just through a couple quick slides on our specific company. I'll make sure I'm sharing the correct slide here. Let's see. One moment, I need to grant Zoom access to be able to view my screen. I might come back and do that a little bit later. It's asking me to restart my computer. So we'll go ahead and move forward just as a broad overview of what we do. We invest primarily in companies that are developing new therapeutics, primarily oncology, hematology, immunology, rare diseases, and we've been doing this for about 31 years. In total, we've invested in about 100 portfolio companies. Through the investment over the years, we've had 27 new FDA-approved products that we've helped develop and bring to market, which is, I think, a track record that we are particularly proud of. Interestingly enough, a sort of heartwarming story. My wife is in her fellowship at Duke right now in infectious diseases, and I got a text from her on Friday saying that she had just prescribed for the first time through a compassionate use program a novel anti-infective called fosmanogepix, Gepix, which is a drug that we helped develop. So I think it's an exciting industry to be sort of at the forefront of drug development and therapeutic development, really trying to advance and bring new medicines to patients in the clinic. So pleasure to be here again and looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Great. Thank you, Drew. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Nate. Hopefully my screen will share. Okay, good. I don't have to reboot to share. So yeah, it's interesting. So I'm at LifeScan, we make the one-touch blood glucose meter, so a medical device company. And pharma and med devices, we live and die by PowerPoint. We can't do anything without PowerPoint. So here's my PowerPoint. So tonight, I want to go through with you briefly my timeline of how I got from where I think most of you are, full-time clinicians, to where I am now today, which is head of medical affairs at an international company. And how did I do that? So I'm going to take you through my journey. And while it might seem like a straight line and like I knew what I was doing when I started out, I didn't. I had no idea I was going to end up in medical affairs. I had no plans to end up in medical affairs. I thought I would just practice medicine and see patients for my entire career. But in hindsight, looking back on it, if I had had that plan, I would do it exactly the same way I did because it just worked out beautifully and had me well prepared for the role I need. So I want to share it with you. So if you want to do it too, you can. So I started very traditionally, med school, internship, residency, and then I did an endocrinology fellowship. And then the next point here, practice of medicine, I really, really want to emphasize, if you want to go into medical affairs, you need to have clinical experience seeing patients under your belt. So even if you know in your training that you want to go into industry, I would strongly encourage you to get out, do some years of practice, see patients, because that's a skill that only a clinician can bring into a pharmaceutical or medical device company. Nobody else can bring that in. And that makes you unique, and you need to develop that skill. And then to continue your medical knowledge, continuing education, of course, to keep your license current, you need CME hours. But to be useful to a company, you want to have a really strong base in your specialty or subspecialty. And it's even better if it's more broad across medicine, but you need more than just the minimum CME. And then as you go along, take advantage of any additional training that comes your way. A great way to do it is to join speaker bureaus. Not only is it free training, they actually pay you to get trained, and they will train you on public speaking and presenting. And if you ever get the opportunity to train on leadership and management, absolutely take that opportunity, because it will do you well as you advance your career. You may say, well, how do I get those opportunities? Well, as you move along this timeline, you'll see, because serving on committees, a lot of times they want you to lead and they want you to manage. So they will give you the opportunities for those trainings. But serving on committees is great experience, and you can start small just within your practice. If there's a need to get a new vendor and you're vetting different vendors, volunteer to be on that committee. Then you can also volunteer for committees within your health system or hospital. The local, state, and regional specialty societies, like the Durham Orange County Medical Society, they have committees that people, they take volunteers, they need volunteers to serve on those committees. Also, the North Carolina Medical Society, those are great places to get some practical experience. And then once you've got some of that under your belt, you can move into the national and international societies in your specialty or subspecialty. Volunteer for those committees. There might be a little bit more competition to get on the committees, but they still need people. And you may not get on the first year, but believe me, there's tons of committees and tons of opportunities. Once you have some of that experience under your belt, then you can look for a leadership position, an elected position. Again, you can start locally to get some of that experience under your belt. I would recommend that. That's how I did it. Leadership in non-medical groups is also great training. Skills you need to be a leader will transfer across industries, so you don't need to just focus on medical groups to lead. And then if you can get elected, run for, if you don't get the first time, try again, boards of directors and the executive committees of the boards. That's the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, because that also will give you great leadership experience and a lot of insight, and make important contacts. And if you're heading towards medical affairs, knowing people, knowing key opinion leaders is very important, and you get it through serving on committees and being in leadership positions. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And then you should develop expertise. If you're in a leadership position or serving on committees, you'll probably get asked to be an advisor or a consultant. Say yes, take up those opportunities. Consider being an expert witness. That helps you learn more about different areas, and knowing a little bit about legal isn't bad either. Author posters or abstracts, present orally at meetings or just within speaker bureaus as well. And be an author or co-author on publications. Again, a lot of these will come to you as you're on committees and in leadership positions, but you can also just generate these on your own as well. And then finally, if you do decide you want to move on into industry, particularly a pharmaceutical or medical device company in medical affairs, networking is key. Network with everyone, talk to everyone about it. Let people know you're open to a role. The way I got my first role is I pulled aside a sales rep who was in my office, and I said, I'm interested in medical affairs. I like your company. Do you have any openings? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. And that's where I ended up. You should learn how to interview and learn how to create a resume. And a CV is not a resume. There's a lot of good resources for that. You don't have to pay for a consultant. LinkedIn is if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. It's like a professional Facebook. So it's not all that Facebook politics and stuff. It's very professional. And there's a lot of people on there who will give you, they have posts and they tell you how to write a resume, how to interview effectively. And a lot of great information is available for you to just take on free. And then networking is a two-way street. You want to network so that you can meet people, so you can get recommended for jobs, and that's for you, but you also need to give of yourself when you network. And again, social media and LinkedIn is a great place for that. go ahead and put on posts, either written posts or video posts. Those are great ways to get known and to network. Remember, if you're a healthcare professional, you've got the skills to do all these things. You have them. Say yes if you're asked and volunteer if you're not asked. As a physician, you have skills that are proven that hiring managers want. You've proven you can work under pressure and deliver results, that you're a leader, a decision maker, and a problem solver. Those are skills that hiring managers want. You've got them, and they know it. If you think that you need to go to business school or get an MBA before you transition to industry, you don't. You have the technical knowledge needed for almost all the non-clinical roles that are out there. And what you don't know, they can train you on or mentor you. What they want and need is your patient care experience. Remember, as a clinician, you're the only one who can bring that in. They need that. And I have my contact information here. You can take a screenshot, email me, call me, connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to share these slides if you want them. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And Mike, last but not least.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I think the one thing sort of to point out here is that there's really no traditional path, from how someone got from point A to point B. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I practiced for over 30 years. And, I didn't, I just sort of, worked my way from, where I was to where I am. I'm currently the chief medical director for a company called Carolina Complete Health Network. We're part of the Medicaid managed care in North Carolina, of which there are 5. And, I didn't really have any sort of, I did not have a planned strategy for exit. When I would teach my residents, and even today, I would say, probably the best thing is to have a better strategy than I did. I found myself in a position where I was doing something that I really liked to do. I was on the North Carolina Medical Society. It afforded me a lot of opportunities at the time when we were making the move from traditional Medicaid to managed care. We sort of came up with an idea about the provider-led entity, and I'm not going to go to all that detail now, but suffice it to say, it's really the only model of its type in the United States. It's gaining more traction as we've been very successful with this model. And so in doing that, it's something I really believed in. I believe that to have physicians say and how we're going to do these things was really important. And so I just worked the problem, sort of year after year of being involved, working in committees, and then helping them sort of establish themselves until the point where one day, I sort of knocked on the door and said, "Look, is there work for me here?" And they said, "Yeah, we now need someone who's a higher level medical doctor who has lots of contacts and who can help us, wade through what we don't know and what most insurance companies don't know, what most of the people in medical insurance companies don't know is the actual medicine." I mean, they write policies, there's a lot of policies writers, a lot of people who work in back rooms, but how that affects the care we deliver every day is sort of foreign to them. And so they rely on folks, content experts like myself. So that's how I sort of moved from one point to the other. And, so I think, my take home message is, when you'll hear this from pretty much everyone, I guess, who does anything, says eventually, if you really do something you like, it's really not work. And that's sort of what you try and find. And I wish I could say there is no cookbook answer to it. Everyone finds their own way or finds their own path. Some people continue on in medicine forever, and God bless them. And some of us, find things to do outside of the traditional bedside clinical work and try and use those skills that we learned in doing all of that and put them into a different venue. And that's what I've done at Carolina Complete Health, like I said, which we do Medicaid managed care. So.
Great. So what I'll do, thank you very much, Mike. So what I will do is just start then just the open Q&A part. And again, please feel free to direct message me questions in the chat. And so what I first wanted to do is just some individual follow-up questions that I'd received in the chat to each of the speakers. I'll just give you one each, starting with Felix. And I think, as everyone knows, that this is a time where like DEI is almost being turned into like a forbidden word, and that my understanding is there's been a lot of pressure on private companies, and I was just curious of how are you just navigating the current situation? I think particularly because understanding the unique situations of our patients is so incredibly important for our practice.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm not surprised that that's like the first question that comes to me. A lot of people have been asking me that. I would say that it just all depends. It depends on the vantage point that you're coming at within the healthcare ecosystem. It depends what we're actually talking about because a lot of words get conflated in this space between DEI, health equity. These are very specific terms that overlap a lot of times and, benefit one another and interplay, but they're also distinct. The reason I say that is because we have those in the life sciences and pharma industry where there's a lot of health equity work being done around diversifying clinical trials. There's a lot of investment that's been done there, and rightfully so, because we know that we can trust the data coming out of those clinical trials more when the actual patients or the participants reflect the country that we live in or the population that we're looking for these drugs and these innovations to actually serve. And so that investment is not just going to disappear. That's a good investment for those companies, and it's good for them to invest that because the providers and the clinicians that are going to be using those drugs are going to trust the outcomes more. And so I don't see that space just going away. Then you have those who have, federal funding and that federal funding being at risk because of certain tag words or certain buzzwords. And I think that space is ever evolving. I think we're seeing back and forth around NIH grants being removed because of certain buzzwords and that being challenged in the courts. And we'll see what that outcome, happens at the end of the day, whether that challenge stays or not. Um, I think in those spaces, I can see those healthcare players shifting language a bit more, being a bit more risk averse and being a bit more conservative in their approaches, as opposed those in life sciences really sticking to the investments that they made in, diversifying their clinical trials. For the tech space, it depends how your business is designed. So for Doximity in particular, the way we make money is typical to a lot of other social media networks is through advertisements. And those advertisements are typically through either life sciences companies, so pharma clients, or hospital clients. And so with those being our main like clientele and me in a role that's health equity specific, I'm really trying to shape our business to ask the question of how can we support the health equity goals of our clients in particular. And as I named for the life sciences folks, that's not going away. They're going to continue that investment in diversity in clinical trials. We saw them actually protect and defend their DEI work within their boards and their stakeholders. Recently, a lot of anti-DEI proposals are being given to stakeholders within these public companies, and they're defending that as well. So I think all of those are really good signs for us as a tech company who is heavily partnered with those in life sciences to name for ourselves, this is going to continue to be an investment and it makes sense for us. And then there's also the part of us reflecting on what is our mission, what are our values, and how do we defend those values and make sure that we stick to them because that's really important to that authenticity for our members.
Thank you so much, Felix. Really appreciate that. Um, so these are just follow-up questions for Drew is how do you get venture capital and how are you finding clinical trials that are worth investing in?
Yeah, happy to answer both of those. I think they're a sort of two different, one more in the career trajectory. I was actually introduced to Pappas Capital while I was still studying at the University of North Carolina. I did the joint MD MBA degree there. Had the opportunity to join as an intern, so had some familiarity with the firm. Started meeting some other clinicians and members of the team who transitioned to venture capital at the time, and maintained the connection with the firm to be able to find a role full time, and transition back into venture capital. So I think it was just to some degree fortuitous, but also making sure to explore alternative opportunities that were available to me. The next question I think is particularly interesting, which is how do we find clinical trials to invest in? How do we find drugs to invest in, companies to invest in, and assets to invest in? And the answer is that that's probably the core of my job, where I use my degree and background the most. We evaluate roughly 500 to 600 new opportunities per year within our firm, and each of those is a new scientific or new therapeutic opportunity, new drug candidate, new specific drug pathway, targeting a new receptor that I haven't, didn't study since before step one. And so it was, I think a very, very interesting and intriguing time. I like to explain it to other clinicians sometimes by saying, it's like you're attending a couple grand rounds a day where you're hearing some really new, interesting science and emerging science, or maybe a science-focused rounds. You hear a presentation for an hour and then have the ability to try and interpret the preclinical studies and interpret any clinical data that might be available to you. Pair that with what working knowledge we have about the indication, the unmet medical need, and the patient population, and then decide whether or not to further act and actually enter into a period of due diligence. Of the 500 to 600 companies we see every year, we make 4 to 5 investments. So we pick 4 to 5 of those companies. So it's a pretty rigorous screening process across our various companies and entities. The full review of the therapeutic area, the asset, the company, takes us about 3 months or so. So we do tend to have a couple working in parallel. What's important, I think, about what we do is we have a very collaborative approach to what we do. We tap into a pretty diverse network of experts across the life cycle of what it takes to do drug development, which includes controls, chemistry, and manufacturing, which many aren't aware of, sort of the regulatory pathway going forward. And then we always ask for a domain expert clinician to come on with us and help us evaluate the technology. For example, we do a lot of hematology oncology, and one of our venture partners is a hematologist oncologist. He was chair of Duke's Department of Hemonc for quite a while, and then was up at the Wistar Cancer Institute, and is now with us as a senior venture partner to help us evaluate opportunities. We see most of these just from co-investors, investors, and people that we work with regularly. We also have a relationship with Duke. One of our venture partners helps run the translational medicine office, so we have the opportunity to evaluate any emerging science that's coming out of the Duke Health system, and do tend to see a lot locally as well, specifically for North Carolina, University of North Carolina, and Wake Forest. We also have relationships with large pharma. Large pharma, based on whatever strategic priorities they have, will deprioritize certain drugs, and so we have the chance to evaluate them and interpret if we think they're good science. So it's I think the most exciting part of my job is getting to try and see what's coming, what's 5 to 7 years from being approved, and then hopefully trying to influence the investment landscape and pick the right drugs. There's a pretty well-published indication of how the frequency with which drugs fail clinical trials, and the rate of failure as you march all the way through phase 1 through phase 3 for a variety of reasons, be it safety or efficacy, is remarkably high. And so, despite our best efforts, we really do try and make sure that we're using our experience and evaluating the data to the best of our ability. But at the end of the day, the clinical data is going to be what it's going to be, and that is just a risk that we have to be willing to take in our industry. I hope that answered the question enough.
Thank you. And then just as a follow-up question for that, for people who may be less familiar with finance, I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the difference between what is the buy side versus the sell side, and how people may make that choice if they're considering entering finance.
Yeah, it's a great question. So venture capital sits on the buy side of the equation, which are groups and entities that are looking to invest money, capital into companies in order to buy a portion of ownership in that company. So that can, traditionally in biotech and biopharma, it's venture capital. In other industries, in tech, it's also venture capital, but in some other industries, private equity can count as the buy side as well. I'm sure many of us are familiar with private equity and sort of where they sit in the healthcare ecosystem as well. Sell side, on the other hand, are those who are working to assist these companies to try and access buy side and investors. So pitching to groups like ours, historically, you think of sell side opportunities and a pathway that is, I think, is relatively well established for clinicians looking for non-clinical pathways is to work in an investment bank as an analyst, as a technical analyst. Most of them are MDs or PhDs in the biotech space who are helping to give recommendations on clinical trials, interpret data that comes out of them, and then position those companies to be able to sell themselves to investors like us.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Elizabeth, and the question was asking how much practice of medicine is enough before transitioning to a medical affairs career?
Yeah, the classic answer, it depends, right? But I would probably say a minimum of 3 to 5 years. More is better. This is really good news if you're late in your career, like I was. I practiced endocrinology for 28 years before I transitioned to medical affairs. The it gives you a lot more knowledge and information. You're more valuable to the company when you come in if you have that stronger background. What some other people do, though, is they continue to work part-time. After 28 years, I said, I don't need to do that anymore. But if you have fewer years under your belt, you can see patients for a half a day or 1 day or 2 days a week in a clinic and also do your other job. And that keeps you very much in the active learning phase and really knowing what's going on, and you have your finger right on the pulse. Once you step away, you start to, it's a little bit of a distance, and maybe there's a new class of medicines that you've never used and you didn't hear from the patients directly how they're feeling on it and how they're doing with it. So that is another way of getting that clinical practice, is continue to do it. And,
Great.
I
And then,
realized listening, I realized one thing I left off my little fishbone diagram was clinical research, which I did. And that also helped get me into medical affairs because I did have a background doing clinical research. So if that comes your way, say yes.
another question I received too is just asking more about speakers bureaus. So would these be ones where you're doing talks for pharmaceuticals or for other organizations, and how do the speaker bureaus exactly work if you want to get involved in that?
Sure. So for me, it started with pharmaceutical and medical device companies, and you're giving, well, I'm old. So initially they didn't have the speeches, and the slides weren't as locked and set as they are now, but now it's like you can't touch it. Here are the slides, here's what you're going to present, here's what you're going to say. And you have to do fair balance, which means you tell the benefits, but you also have to tell the risks, and it's all FDA regulated and very tightly controlled. But they train you on that. And it's that you get paid to do the training, you get paid to do the presentations, they pay your travel. And so it's a nice secondary stream of income. I actually started doing that to help pay for my kids' college tuition, because I'm an endocrinologist. We don't make any money. So that's how I made the money to put my kids through college. And it really gave me a nice view of pharmaceutical companies kind of from the inside, as a clinician, especially if you go through training at an academic medical center. They don't let you even see any drug reps, and you only learn about the generic names. You don't even learn the brand names, and it's all horrible. It's the dark side. And it's not the dark side. In industry, we want to help patients too. That's why we're there. We're there. We have mission statements and we believe them. And our mission statements are all feel-good things about helping patients live better lives. And we believe that. And that's why we're there. And at LifeScan, we have a lot of people in our company who have diabetes, or their family members have diabetes. For them, it's personal. And so we have a lot of passionate people who care a lot. And so it's industry is a good place to be. I really enjoy that. And so, if you get invited to be on a speaker bureau, yes, there's the Sunshine Act, and but it's not evil. It's not.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And next question for Mike is, question was just asking about how did you go about actually learning about about the operations for a health payer system, especially since we're often not given a lot of education on billing and financing through our medical training.
That is a fantastic question, and I will tell you that when I first started, I felt like I was dropped into a Dutch conversation, and I do not speak Dutch. There are so many acronyms. I would share my little book with you that I had to keep next to me when I would go to meetings to like figure out all the little acronyms.
I've got one of those books too. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So no, so it's like anything. Look, here's the deal. Yes, it's a different environment. But we know the language. I mean, we know the language of medicine, so we understand what they're trying to do. And it is very complicated. There are lots of bits and pieces that go on in the background that involve coding and vendors and how they go about doing all the billing and payment integrity and all these things that require you to just pay attention. But we're smart people, right? And so you have to rely on the fact that you can learn very quickly, and you do learn very quickly because it's very immersive. So you don't necessarily need to know everything to be really successful, right? If you're willing to know what you don't know and ask the questions, you're going to learn. And I think that is really for me and the stage of my career. I mean, I've been in this role for 2 years. I'm not the young guy. I mean, I got gray hair now, like half the other people in this room. So, and you can do it. There are some folks that choose and maybe a more traditional path, or they become medical directors and they do UM review. And I do some of that. I do help, and I do learn how to do UM reviews and prior auths and all that. But yeah, we are smart people that can learn and can figure it out pretty quickly. But also, in these roles, these are like leadership roles too, right? So you surround yourself with people who are content experts or who have been in this, and they help you. So like for me and the work I do and the company I'm with, I consider sometimes that like I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I have such a great team. Everyone works really, really well together. We mesh together. We solve problems together. Everyone is very dynamic, and everyone wants to solve those problems and work together to solve those problems. And in so doing, that's how you continue to learn more. And then little by little, your knowledge base grows. So yeah, great question. But don't be afraid of not knowing something. That's the whole thing. Don't be afraid. Don't ever say, well, I don't know how to do that, because you know so much that you know more than you think you know. And then when you get in there, people look at you and they're like, wow, I mean, where have you been? How come, how do you know all this stuff? And then we need to know that and how that applies when we do this. How does that apply to a patient's outcome? Like, why does that make sense? Why does this not make sense? So yeah, don't be afraid of that. You'll get it figured out.
Great. Oh, thank you. So his next question is for the panel as a whole. And so the question is, so it seems like whenever I see a non-clinical job opportunity on LinkedIn, they're always like asking like several years of experience. And I guess the question is if you are someone who is looking to make the leap and haven't had the chance to get experience, like what do you do in particular? How do you market yourself for these non-clinical opportunities, particularly if you haven't had the chance to gain direct work experience?
Can I chime in on that?
Yep.
That's also a really good question. So I will say what I learned, like this was not the first thing I looked at in order to sort of move my career on for my exit strategy. I think a lot of my residents ask, like, well, should I get my master's? Like, should I do something else? I would say this, if you want to do it early. It gets a lot harder to do later on. Also understand that the reality is if you're in a hospital system, like some of our major hospital institutions in North Carolina, there's a lot of internal hiring. It's very difficult to break in from the outside. And I learned that, and it takes years of sort of plugging at that to and maybe banging your head against the wall. You're gonna have a lot more disappointments than you have success. That's just the nature of the gig, right? There aren't a lot of positions. They start ferreting out the internal hires or the external hire from the internal hire. Especially when you want to work into some of the people on this panel have really more niche jobs and other things. But if you're in the world like I know a lot of my residents would talk to me about, well, how do I get into the C-suite? How do I do this? How do I do that? You just got to keep working the problem, right? If it's something, if it's really something you want to do, if you're interested in that, I'm more like in health administration. So if you really want to do that, do you need an MHA? Do you need your MBA? No, you don't. You really don't. Will it help? Sure. But do it early when you have the opportunity because it's really expensive, right? You're going to look at $80,000 to $100,000 to get your MBA, in a year or two. And it's nice, and people do look at that, and they will point that, well, you have that, and so that may make you more marketable. So I would say do it early rather than late, but you don't need it. Sometimes just your experience and the things you've done. This is not the only thing I did, right? I was the president of the North Carolina College of Emergency Physicians. I was involved in the National Society. I was the president of the Medical Society. And so there's a lot of relationship building. So like the folks on this call, you're part of the Durham Orange County Medical Society, or at least probably many of you are. Well, that's where you want to be. You want to start building those relationships there. You want to build relationships by joining the North Carolina Medical Society, by joining your specialty society. And that's how you start building these relationships and meeting people and understanding how the not the 500-foot view is, but what's the 5,000-foot view, then what's the 10,000-foot view, and you sort of build that up.
Right.
Thank you.
I might follow on to that commentary because I agree, especially with the comments about networking. In addition to the medical societies that were mentioned, I currently serve on the board of the North Carolina Life Science Association, which is a more industry focused trade organization. And we actually host open meetings every time we have board meetings and events for anyone to connect. It's a pretty large industry representation for North Carolina companies. And I think the way that we've seen many clinicians break into the field just from our perspective. It really is from the sort of two lenses. One is what I'm doing from the investor side, but the other one is for our portfolio companies from the operations and management side of small biotechs and specifically what they're looking for. The way we've seen individuals be successful is usually starting off on a consultancy basis, on a part-time basis. I think it was mentioned before, keeping some level of clinical practice, and then actually working either to help consult with a biotech about a particular clinical problem and how your drug might help solve that, to help with clinical trial design or be a PI on a particular study that then becomes the lead PI, that then becomes the interim chief medical officer of the company, that then filters into the chief medical officer and stays in industry for 10 years, which is one of our current chief medical officers, was his path to do it. So I think part-time consulting work and finding those opportunities there are even in North Carolina. The North Carolina Biotech Center has 97 portfolio companies right now that are grant awardees that are all developing new drugs right here in our state and are all looking for all looking for help, all looking for assistance on the clinical side of things, all looking for help to design their clinical programs, understand the needs of their patients, and would be very welcome to help consider some part-time work, especially for those in the local community. Now, in our company specifically, we actually do have a structured venture fellow program. We just hired our venture fellow for this year. She's a practicing emergency medicine physician at the Durham VA. He'll be working with us part-time, and the goal is to give some exposure over the summer and potentially over the year, depending on the length of the fellowship, to what we do as investors, and if that might be of interest to clinicians to maintain that level of practice. If you're specifically interested in venture capital, there are a few programs that actually do this that will pair directly with venture capital firms, specifically life science and biotech venture capital firms, to give you a taste of what investing is like. The most well-known one is probably Venture Capital University, VC University, which is a crash course in VC. It's basically, if you were to condense everything, you would learn an MBA about venture capital into 10 weeks. That's the course to do, and it'll pair you with someone specifically to try and get some of that. But I think it takes active effort to attending sessions like this, meeting people who have done it in the past, and just asking questions. I think all of us are willing to have coffee or meet and talk about our career paths, and be able to take advantage of some of these resources.
And I would say you don't have to do it all in one step. I don't think any of us did. So, if you want to get into medical affairs and be a medical director, maybe you start as a medical science liaison. Those are the people who go out into the offices. They're not sales, but they go in and answer the questions, and they can actually, since they're medical affairs, they can address off-label questions, and it's a peer-to-peer, scientist to scientist, clinician to clinician level discussion, and that gets you in the door. And they want you to have knowledge of the disease state and knowledge of whatever the drug class is that that company makes. But that's what they want, is that medical knowledge. So even if you don't have those other skills, that's a way to get in and start working your way up. And networking locally, there's also, for women, there's a organization called Women in Bio, and it's nationwide, but they have an RTP chapter. So if you Google Women in Bio, you can join that. Women can join that.
That's great, and I'm really glad that you brought up the medical science liaison pathway as well, because I was going to ask about that. For Felix, I was curious just in terms of tech. To like what extent do you think someone needs to have at least some familiarity with programming or having somewhat of a programming background? Because I think it's one of those things where like we're always interfacing with EMRs, we're interfacing with our phones, so you get kind of a sense like, oh, we feel like we're kind of experts, but then it's you're walking in, I think, in some ways into a different culture in a tech company. So what do you think are like this? What are the things that would make someone be a successful healthcare tech applicant?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the role is that, or the pathway that you're looking to go down towards. Like, if you're looking more towards more technical roles, like a chief product officer role or something that's kind of leading product development, it is super helpful to have a general understanding of how engineers work, how data analysts work, and how they interact with each other in teams to be able to actually create a digital product. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have the technical coding language skills that a lot of those types of roles have. If you do have that, it is just a plus or a bonus to be able to better understand the way they work and the limitations that they may have with developing products. That can always be a bonus in the tech realm. But I think, similar to what Elizabeth has been talking about, that clinical expertise is really useful when it comes to business strategy and being able to say, like, will this product work in a clinical scenario or will it be useful or not? And that guidance is something that only clinicians can kind of offer. So that can be really critically important. And then some of the skills that others have noted around being able to problem solve, being able to work in teams, being really curious and having that aptitude to just kind of, jump into complex problem solving is really key. The other things that I'll add in terms of kind of breaking into industry is definitely network on LinkedIn. I know Elizabeth mentioned that earlier in this talk. Develop your LinkedIn profile, make sure that it kind of highlights the areas that you think are most critical or applicable to the industries that you're trying to move towards. That also goes towards your CV. Digest your CV into 1 or 2 pages and really highlight the things that are really important towards the industry that you want to move towards. network with people who sit in the roles that you're trying to move towards. Agree with Elizabeth as well on taking that first step. Don't think that you want to start with a director role or a C-suite role. Get your first step into the door and build trust with people in those companies. Trust is really what gets you into those C-suites. They need to understand that, or trust that you know the business and that you know how teams work. Because if you're going to sit in those roles, you're going to have decision-making capacity around that, and they need to be able to trust in you in that. I think those things are also really important.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time. So the first is we have the CME code for tonight's in the chat, but as in J as in Jack, O as in ostrich, Q as in quest, H as in U as in umbrella, and M as in Mary. And so again, it's JOQHUM, and that you can text that to 919-213-8033. Again, 919-213-8033. As a closing question, something I'd like to ask each of you, and I get inspired by the Ezra Klein Show podcast, is what are pieces of media, whether they're books, podcasts, websites, email, newsletter, things that you found that have been useful, or you look for updates for your field, or just find that's just helpful with being informed for your day-to-day work?
I'll drop it in the
Well,
chat. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I mean, for me, I think from us, modern healthcare is sort of my go-to. We get good synopsis of what's happening in the healthcare industry. So if you want to see what's going on in the world of managed care, commercial care, Medicare, Medicaid, there's a lot of good stuff in there that's very relevant. Kind of give you a flavor of sort of our day-to-day business.
I dropped mine in the chat, but the Rock Health newsletter is a great overview of what's going on in digital health.
For industry specific items, there's Endpoints News sends out sort of a daily update about industry news. Also, BioCentury hosts a very nice hangout, and then there's a biotech hangout channel specifically on LinkedIn that meets with CEOs and executives every week to kind of highlight some of the recent developments in drug development, which I think are very interesting.
In
Thank you, Elizabeth.
in diabetes, there's a newsletter sent out called Close Concerns that comes out every day, and they highlight a lot of that's going on in industry and tech and development, and to everybody who's in diabetes gets that in industry. Close Concerns.
Thank you. And I think too, it's also helpful, I think, just for breaking in, and I was speaking from my brief experience in biotech business development as well, is that I think if you're, especially trying to start to interview the more, I think you can just kind of immerse yourself and understand what are the big events going on in your field and the big players. I think it's going to be helpful. And also just giving you questions to ask when you have those networking meetings. So great. Well, Felix, Elizabeth, Drew, and Mike, thank you really very much for taking your time. I think this was really informative. I think my biggest regret is we just didn't have you for longer, because I think we could have gone into even more detail about your career and your work. If anyone wants to get in touch with a panelist, please email me and I can help connect you. And all of our panelists too are also on LinkedIn, so that could be a good encouragement to set up a LinkedIn profile if you don't have one already. And again, I think for those making the changes, I think it's great that all these individuals have volunteered their times and I think are putting themselves out there to be connected. And so really, really appreciate it. So thank you again. Just a quick reminder again, just if you're not a member for DOCMS, please consider joining our group, and also just be on the lookout too for that sign up for the community service event on July 12th. And I hope you all have a great evening.